companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to President." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again," had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved, then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey there, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. Hope you're having a marvelous day. Louise and I were walking yesterday. We've got, since we did this story earlier in the week, I believe it was, as kind of a geeky science story, but just a fascinating piece in one of the science journals that got picked up, as I recall, by the New York Times, about how they took these two groups of people and had them both go for a walk every day. And one group was instructed to look for things that give you awe, A-W-E, awe, like, wow. And the other group was instructed to just have a nice walk. And what they found after a period of time, my recollection is that it was 8 weeks, but it was some period of time that they could measure. What they found was that the people who were finding things to be in awe of every day on their walks had significant improvements in their mental health and their emotional health. So anyhow, Louise and I were walking along the Columbia River yesterday, and there was this flock of geese in the river, and this little tiny thing that kept dipping into the water, and we watched them for a while, and it turned out it's a cormorant, which is a kind of bird that dives down under the water for sometimes a minute or two, and eats fish and stuff. But this is a young cormorant who apparently had been abandoned. He's like bonded with one of the geese, and he thinks this goose is his mom, and he's following this flock of geese around. But he keeps diving under the water, and when he comes up a minute or so later, the geese have moved on, and he has to catch up with them. And it was just like, wow. And then Sean this morning texted us a picture that she took. She lives in a floating home on the Columbia River, and or maybe it's the Willamette, I forget which. In any case, she sent us this picture of a blue heron that was just like right out in front of her house today. And she said, this is my awe picture of the day. So special bonus points today, Anything Goes Friday. If you call in and say, this is what I have been inspired by. I think we need to share these kind of stories with each other and keep each other up, right? It's not a time to be freaked out. Obviously there's freaky stuff going on, but it's not a time to be frightened or anything like that. It's time for us to just, reach into our core and stabilize and strengthen ourselves, because it's a tough time right now. And to be available and be there for other people. It's just, Chris Christie is now on his 6th day in the hospital. Not a single word from him. The last time he tweeted was Saturday, almost a full week ago. The average time that people are hospitalized for COVID is 5 days. If they go over 5 days, that's considered generally a bad sign. So who knows? But Chris Christie apparently infected by, or at least around the time that Donald Trump was. He was he was involved in the Trump debate prep and all this kind of stuff. Not a good thing. Donald Trump hasn't made any public appearances, unless something has happened in the last hour that I failed to catch, in several days. And in fact, yesterday he tweeted out this video, and I'm looking at it going, and it looked like he was on the lawn of the White House. And I'm looking at this video and looking at the grass in the lawn. And the grass is all out of focus. Even the grass close in is out of focus. And it's like, that wouldn't happen if it was an actual camera shot of him standing on the lawn of the White House. You would have a difference in focus between the close in and far away. And I'm thinking, now I'm not sure of this. I'm no expert on this. I just qualify this. I've done television with a green screen. We've used a green screen for the first year that we had a TriCaster. In fact, one of these video devices when we were doing our show, when that video part of our show was on the internet back, 12, 13 years ago, or 10 years ago anyway. So I have some familiarity with it, but I'm wondering if that was even recorded day before yesterday when it was pushed out, or if this is from Monday. And then of course he called into all those shows yesterday, no video at all, and just totally roided up. At least that's what it sounded like. Meanwhile, Mike Pence has canceled his travel, and which is really weird, because if there is a moment when somebody needs to be on the campaign trail trying to whip up Trump voters, it's right now. And, Pence had this campaign event scheduled for, well over a week, and all of a sudden, nope. Which probably, well, not probably, who knows probably, but could mean, number one, that Pence is positive. After all, his eyes were bright red during the debate. Or number two, that he's concerned, or people in the White House are concerned, or Republican leadership is concerned, that Trump is either going, at risk of his COVID crashing him and incapacitating him in a way that would require Pence to step in, or B, that maybe there's even a conversation in the cabinet. I mean, Nancy Pelosi today is in the House. They're introducing legislation. Jamie Raskin put it together to create a congressional commission. And the 25th Amendment is entirely the cabinet. And it's not entirely, actually. It has to be initiated by the vice president. Then half of the cabinet has to say yes, kick the guy out. And then I believe it requires 2/3 of the House and Senate. I could be wrong on that. I'd have to go back and look. It's been a while since we've done stories on the 25th Amendment. But the bottom line is that it's a fairly complex process. And Pelosi's, in my opinion, trying to simplify it. And frankly, I suspect that this is not because of the COVID crisis right now. That this would be a way of, this would be a strategy to point out to the country, fairly irrefutably, if Trump loses the election and completely loses it, goes completely psychotic, or continues to be on steroids, or when he's crashing on steroids. Typically, Sanjay Gupta on CNN this morning said that the typical course for these steroids is 5 days. So today is, I think, the last day for Trump on these? Or maybe it was yesterday. And when they wear off, there could be hell to pay. We don't know. Over on Fox News, Chris Wallace was pointing out that the reason why the Election Commission had to go with a virtual debate was because they couldn't, their camera people and their sound people refused to work in the same room with Donald Trump. And they couldn't find, quote, uncommitted voters who were willing to be in the same room with Donald Trump. Or at least they couldn't find enough, because this is a town hall thing. You're asking questions of uncommitted voters, which is like, really? But, that's what it is. So anyhow, we'll see where that goes. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell is saying, we've got a choice here in the Senate. We can look at the stimulus bill that Steve Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi are negotiating right now, or any of the other ones that there have been two passed by the House of Representatives that Mitch McConnell's refusing to take up. The HEROES Act, the $3 million one, and there's another one that's around $2 million. But he's just saying, no, we're not going to do that, because we've got to focus our efforts on getting this crazy right-wing judge on the bench. This member of this Catholic cult who has, signed newspaper advertisements saying Roe v. Wade is, basically an abomination. And it looks like they're doing absolutely everything they can to hide Amy Coney Barrett's records. Meanwhile, in Michigan, the governor, is safe now, but now we've got a Republican sheriff, quoting a piece of legislation. It's Michigan Law 764.16 that says under certain circumstances, it is legal for private citizens to arrest somebody if that person is committing a felony. And the sheriff is saying, well, the governor was arresting all of us by forcing us to wear masks. That's a felony. So these guys were just trying to arrest her. So the domestic terrorism group in Michigan that is now in custody apparently has some allies among the Michigan sheriffs. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday. The second hour, Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the hour, taking your calls. Third hour, back to Anything Goes Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So I will be picking up your calls shortly. Stick around. And welcome back. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
Morning, Tom.
Hey, Cliff.
Hey, to use Greg Talas's words, you're the best.
Thanks.
Hey,
what are you calling about?
Something I can't understand, Tom. Like, when you or myself talks to somebody about the way this administration has handled the COVID, we compare our response to South Korea, New Zealand, Taiwan, all these successful countries that handled this thing right. I have not heard one politician on the Democratic side, use this comparison. I mean, it would have been perfect to use on either of the debates when the Trump administration says, well, we did all we could do, we banned China, blah, blah, blah. They don't mention that 40,000 people came in after the China ban. But why don't they just say, listen, South Korea and us had their positive tests the same day. We have 210,000 deaths, and they have like 300. I haven't heard any politician make that comparison like you do all the time. What do you think? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and Taiwan has like 200 deaths, and New Zealand has like 15 deaths, and Australia has a few hundred. You're seeing this all around the world in the countries that got this under control. Particularly those run by women, oddly enough.
It's the same virus. Every country had to deal with the same exact virus, but it was how we handled it compared to these other countries. I just don't. It seems like a fundamental thing to say. A lot of Americans don't know these numbers. They don't know Taiwan had, a handful of deaths. They're just not aware of this. I just think it would be a good way to attack them.
Yeah, and you can bet if the shoe were on the other foot, if there was a Democratic president, the Republicans would be pointing that out every single day. And this is one of the things where it just makes you want to bang your head against the wall when you look at Democratic political strategy. They're
Yes.
Democrats are so committed to doing the right thing, to having good government, to making sure that everybody's needs are covered, that every group is listened to, including the right-wing crazies, and not seeming like they are being partisan, but rather, hey, we're here for everybody. And I get all that. I get the impulse. I get the foundational values of the Democratic Party are in that place. And the Democratic Party has always been the party of working class people. Whereas the Republican Party has, since the 1870s, been the party of the very wealthy and the elite. It's just, these are simple facts. And I think that part of it is that the Democrats know, the Democratic, institutionally they know, and a lot of Democratic politicians know, that among the working class, there are a lot of Republicans. And so they're trying to not seem like, we don't want you here, or they're trying to be nice and reach out to them.
Yeah.
And I think the time for that is way the hell past.
I told you 6 months ago or something, I told you on my calls that it's time to take the gloves off. And I don't think they have. I mean, they try to play too nice.
Yeah. I'm with you, and that's, and so I'll continue to speak out. I'll continue to point out the Republican Party is supporting domestic terrorism. Let's just call it that. The Republican Party, not just Donald Trump, the Republican Party is complicit in the deaths of 200,000 Americans. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Anything goes from. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate States were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just wanted to I think we've pretty much covered most of the major news. As I mentioned, Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us in the second hour of the program for the full hour, taking your calls. And then, our third hour will be getting back to Anything Goes Friday and more of the news of the day as well. Kaylee in Ontario, Canada. Hey, Kaylee, what's on your mind today?
Hello. I would like to talk about the stark differences between Canada and the United States.
Okay.
Just based on today, we got our employment numbers, and they doubled expectations. And remembering, of course, we have a lower population, they expected to put 150,000 new jobs on the board, and they doubled that. And the reason it's being attributed to so many new jobs is because we went safely back to school, and we have subsidized daycare.
How do you go safely back to school?
Sorry?
How do you safely go back to school?
So, first of all, there is no province in Canada that has even close to a 5% positivity rate. So already You know, I think I looked at, we have, in the whole country, we have 18,000 active cases. So you don't have as much.
Wow, we had 56,000 yesterday.
I know.
Brand new cases. And you've got, in the entire country of Canada, 18,000 cases?
18,500 active cases.
We have 1.3 million, I believe. Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive my interrupting you, Kaylee. Finish.
That's okay.
Thought.
So we are like the states. We have federalism, so different provinces, different things are happening, but generally kids are masked, smaller class sizes. They've tried to provide ventilation, and the key word has been both provincial and federal governments have put money into it. Across the board, just from beginning to end, whether it was wage subsidy or boosted unemployment insurance, the money has been there. And it's been crazy to watch I don't even want to call it bipartisan, I almost want to call it nonpartisan nature of the way all of the parties have worked together to do this. Because we don't have a party trying to deny it reality.
Yeah, I saw a news report, it might have been on U.S. television, might have been on BBC, maybe a week or so ago, about an anti-mask demonstration in Canada. My recollection was that it was in Toronto, but I could be wrong. But they pointed out that it was like a couple hundred people. It was considered kind of the lunatic fringe in Canada. It wasn't being endorsed by any politicians. And in fact, it seemed like most of these people were getting their information from Facebook sites that are being flooded with foreign actors who are pretending to be Canadians or Americans and trashing politicians and things. Is that a reasonable description of how it is in Canada right now?
Can I tell you the biggest trafficker in dis and misinformation and the lunatic fringe in Canada is Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd? Quite honestly, wow. We do have small fringes, of 100 people here and there, and it's driven by what you talked about, and just like that New York Times report that came out, last week, about Trump being the biggest driver of misinformation about COVID in the English-speaking world. We very much share a culture, and our social media ecosystems are replicated pretty much. I mean, we have QAnon here, and I'm surprised it wasn't reported in the United States, but one of these QAnon extremists busted through Rideau Hall gates and tried to kill our Prime Minister.
Whoa.
And it's driven by Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, that happened about, I want to say, 2 months ago.
That's incredible.
So we have a radical fringe here, too. It's just much smaller.
Yeah.
And getting back to my original point... Thank you.
No, you can finish your your thought.
I was just going to say, having subsidized daycare really, really helps these parents that need to go back to work.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be a big one. Kaylee, thank you so much for the call. I'm sorry, I do have to cut it off now, but thank you so much. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us on Twitter Live. We'll be right back. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or we'll be shortly. It's Anything Goes Friday, whatever's on your mind. And our entire second hour today, Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be taking your calls.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in two major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an Awe Walk, AWE, an Awe Walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 34 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. We were talking with a caller from Canada a minute ago, and I said, I think we have over 1 million cases in the United States. I was badly out of date on that. We have over 7 million cases of coronavirus in the United States. And we just, Sean just looked up the numbers, the official numbers. Canada's 178,000 throughout the entire country. They're doing it right. We're doing it wrong. We are 4.5% of the world's population. We have between 20 and 25% of the world's coronavirus deaths and cases. Now, those numbers are going to start going down as some really large countries, are basically losing control of this. India, in particular, but China's got, Wuhan is totally back to normal. Right, schools, business, everything. Taiwan is back to normal. South Korea is largely back to normal. New Zealand is back to normal. They're holding, I believe it's this weekend, a rugby tournament with Australia, which most of the country is relatively back to normal. I mean, other countries have gotten this coronavirus under control. South Korea, Taiwan, New Zealand. New Zealand has had, I think, 15 deaths. Period. Through the entire period. And Taiwan, South Korea, both under a couple of hundred, in the neighborhood of a couple of hundred. It's just mind-boggling. Also, by the way, yesterday I said that both remdesivir and the Regeneron 2 monoclonal antibody cocktail that Donald Trump got were developed using stem cells from aborted fetuses. I was wrong. It wasn't the stem cells. They are testing these drugs on tissue derived from aborted fetuses. And the Trump administration outlawed this last year. But these drugs were in development, apparently. I'm not sure if they got around it or how they got around it. And also Moderna and AstraZeneca, they're relying on these stem cells. Johnson & Johnson, today's New York Times, by the way, the headline, Trump's COVID treatments were tested in cells derived from fetal tissue. Johnson & Johnson is testing its vaccine on another so-called cell line originally produced from fetal tissue. All 3 of these vaccine manufacturers, by the way, receive federal funding, and which is, according to Republicans, illegal. So, anyway, it's Anything Goes Friday. It's time for you. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Yeah, those last couple of calls have just been great calls, especially the gal from Canada. I'm glad she called in. And you know what's really funny? Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, for that matter, all have state religion. It's the Anglican Church, but you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's by and large, it's largely ignored. I mean, it's like it's largely ceremonial, sort of like, Congress having a pastor or whatever, religious figure open the Congress every day with a prayer. It's just ceremonial stuff.
Exactly. I wanted to say though that I was on YouTube this morning and I wanted to look up the videos of the Hannity show last night because I was thinking, well, I'm gonna, because I never watch Hannity. I would have heard Trump coughing. They edited all that out. And the other thing, and Trump made some stupid remarks about little fishes. But he's never been in an aquarium in his whole life. Like we got the great one down here, the Monterey Bay Aquarium. If he came to the Monterey Peninsula, if he even bothered to come to California, he'd want to go to the golf course. He wouldn't want to visit one of the best aquariums in the whole world. Just saying. You might have to learn something.
I'm with you. Okay, Dennis, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Zach in North Hollywood. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Morning, Tom. One thing you got to love about me, I call you on a ground line.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it sounds good. What's on your mind?
I asked myself this question recently, and I wanted to ask it of you. Do you think it's possible that we're seeing the sunset and the final diminishing of the selfish, destructive geno in humankind and the dawn of the inclusive, creative geno, where we realize that team over tribe is a better way to go, everyone pulling for each other instead of fighting with one another, sharing the wealth of the planet instead of hoarding it, finding ways to make the planet work for all countries and all people, or is it a pipe dream?
We were working on that pre-Reagan. Bring the world together, everything from Bretton Woods to, the NATO to, just international alliances. Let's bring the world together. Let's have peace. We had relative peace for quite some time after World War II. I guess Jimmy Carter is the only president to have no war, initiated by the United States or no conflict initiated during his presidency. But during the 80s, when America changed, I mean, and not enough people even realize this. Anybody who's an economics wonk or a political wonk understands that when Ronald Reagan became president, he fundamentally changed the economic structure of the United States, the way that our economy works. And he did that through massive tax cuts, through deregulating business, and through making it legal for senior executives in corporations to be compensated with stock. There were just a whole bunch of small, around the edges things that were like little trim tabs that turned the entire economy, so that ever since 1980, the rich have been getting massively richer, and working people have seen a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from them and their homes and their assets into the pockets of the top 1%. And during that time, during that era in the 1980s, there were all these books coming out about how selfishness is a wonderful thing. The whole greed is good thing, the whole Michael Milken thing. Richard Dawkins published his book, The Selfish Gene. I believe it was in the 80s. I might be wrong. It might have been the late 70s. But right around that time, there was this whole kind of wholesale notion that the libertarian ideology, the Thomas Hobbes ideology of, without the iron fist of church and state, life is short, nasty, and brutish, just took over. And America bought this thing. And England bought it, too. I mean, Maggie Thatcher was preaching this in 1978. There is no such thing as society. There's only a collection of individuals. And we are now seeing the result of that. The political landscape and the economic landscape of America right now is the result of believing a story that is not true. And Bregman, I'm forgetting his first name, and I don't see the book right around here so I can grab it, but a fellow by the name of a Dutch guy, but whose last name is Bregman, published a book called Humankind. And it's kind of a takeoff on Peter Farb's book, Humankind, from the 1970s. But he devotes an entire chapter to destroying this myth of the selfish gene. Humans are actually not wired to be selfish. That's not our core nature. That's the deviation from our core nature. That's the exception rather than the rule. We are wired to be cooperators. We are wired to be collaborators. We are wired to be community-oriented. We are wired to take care of each other. We are wired to have compassion. That's what's in our genes. And this idea that Dawkins came up with of the selfish gene and all this stuff has just been so completely and thoroughly debunked on multiple levels in the intervening 40 years. And like I said, Bregman in his book Humankind just dissects this, just takes it apart. So Zach, in answer to your question, the predicate to your question was the assumption that Dawkins was correct, and I would say he was wrong. So I could answer it one of two ways. I could either say, no, we never were that selfish. We always were that egalitarian. It's just that we end up with these bizarre, dysfunctional societies because sociopaths within our societies, achieve power and twist society to their ends, number one. Or number two, we really just, yes, we're going through that evolution, only it's not an actual DNA kind of evolution. It's an awakening, just like we had in 1929 and 1930, where we look back on the 12 years that the Republicans had been running the United States during the 1920s that led to the Great Crash and that led to mass poverty before the Great Depression. The Roaring 20s was a time when the rich were it was roaring because the stock market was roaring, but everybody else was actually getting poorer during the 1920s. And we woke up from that dream. And that was the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. And then Reagan took us back into it, and I think we're waking up again, Zach. I'm actually optimistic.
I feel better.
Good. Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Zach, thanks a lot for the call. Yeah, good talking to you. I'm serious. This book, Humankind, I was talking about it maybe a month ago when I was reading it. I couldn't put it down. It took me 3 days to read the entire book cover to cover because every moment that I wasn't doing something else, I was reading this book. And it was so exciting and so inspiring. And Sean he's in Holland, I don't know if we'll be able to get him on as a guest. Sean has reached out to him. Bretger, say that again, Sean? Rutger Bregman is his name, and the book is Humankind. Thank you, Sean. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday, and Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be with us in the next hour for the whole hour, taking your calls. So get ready if you want to talk to him, too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We live in an extraordinary time. Let's make the most of it. We'll be back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Jay in Harlem, New York. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Wow.
What's up?
My pleasure to finally get to speak to you. I appreciate everything you're doing and have done in terms of being very informative and everything. Now, I have a question. I heard that Nancy Pelosi is the only one that can actually stop this, prevent this Supreme Court appointment. Everyone else can scream, make noise, holler, Chuck Schumer and everything, but no one can stop the process.
Nancy Pelosi has no power in this process, Jay.
But this is what I'm hearing. I mean, this is what I heard. I want you to because this is what I wanted to verify. And the way she would do that, or she could do that, only because it starts in the House, and she's the person who starts that, is the impeachment process. And he has some reason to be impeached.
Oh, yeah.
But once that starts, that all these other things, such as the Senate hearings, have to stop. So if she were to start, and to my knowledge, and no, not knowledge, but she knows, because it was asked of her. She knows this. So I'm saying, I'm like, I'm not sure she knows enough, but she does. So I'm just wondering, and why this is not out there. People just don't know. And I would like to get out there because I think people need to raise that I mean, we need to do. I mean, they say everything we
Jay,
can.
let me stop you right there, because you're running off a misconception, and I've seen this on a number of progressive websites. There's a lot of Democrats who are like, oh, you know, if Nancy Pelosi would just impeach Donald Trump. Well, first of all, that process takes quite a bit of time. I mean, it's got to go through the Judiciary Committee, and then it's got to go to the full House, and they've got to do their whole song and dance like they did last time. Number one. Number two. And that would probably take us beyond the election. Number two, once that's done, the constitutional requirement that the Senate take up that impeachment is identical to the constitutional requirement that the Senate take up a Supreme Court justice who's been appointed by a president. And Mitch McConnell delayed Merrick Garland's hearings in the Senate by 400 plus days. So, over a year. So he could easily say, okay, fine, the House just impeached the president, but we're going to have a hearing on Amy Coney Barrett instead. He does not have to do it. The predicating assumption for the scenario that you just outlined, Jay, is that the Senate has to drop everything and take up impeachment, and they do not. That's merely tradition. Just like they don't have to drop everything and take up a Supreme Court nomination. That's merely tradition. And Mitch McConnell has already shown us that he spits in the face of tradition.
Right,
Sorry
that's for sure. But now let me ask you this. So in the, because remember, we have a short time between now and November, a matter of weeks. I mean, Election Day.
Right.
So if this is a stall tactic, it's an actual official process. And it won't even make it to Mitch McConnell, right? And we're not talking about that. We're talking about in terms of just being able to stop the proceeding because there's an actual impeachment process. He didn't say that had to complete. You know what I'm saying, Tom? You don't have to complete it.
Yeah.
It's the process. Is that correct or no?
No, I get that, but that's not going to interrupt anything in the Senate, Jay. Jay, thank you for the call. We're all wishing and hoping that there was some magic, magic bullet is the old phrase. I hate using that metaphor, but some magic thing that was going to solve it and say, it's just going to be us. We got to vote. We'll be back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at ThomHartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Oh, welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Richard in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I just have a quick question for you. If one of the candidates were to fail to make it to the election day for whatever reason, what will happen to the ballot and the election itself?
I don't know. I'm not sure that, I'm pretty sure that we've never had this situation. I mean, obviously, if Donald Trump was to croak from COVID, God forbid, Mike Pence would be, quickly sworn in as president and would take that spot on that ballot. That Republican, vote would be going for Pence. Same thing, I think, with Joe Biden. It would end up Kamala Harris. But beyond that, how it works beyond that, I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. It would, if there were legal parts of it, it would go through the court process. The political parts of it would be run by the parties. So,
what do you think would happen? What do you think? You're
I think that what would happen is. Yeah, I think what would happen is that, you know, if it was Trump who fell, that we would have President Pence. We might not have a vice president, but he would be the person who either wins or is defeated in the election. If it was Joe Biden, I think it would be Kamala Harris. And, you know, whether she had enough time to add another person to the ticket or not, I think that's how it would play out. So we'll see. Hopefully we won't see, I should say. Don in Sheridan, Iowa. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I finally got a new phone so I can hear, so I can call you, and I have a different thing that I want to ask you about. My daughter has been on Adderall for a long time. She's 25, but we put her on the age of 6. Your ADHD.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. And she tries to get off it, but then she gains so much weight. A year or so ago, you were talking about your wife, and she used something that helped her with sugar. And I wrote it down, and I cannot find it. And I haven't been able to ask you about it because my phone didn't work well enough. And I was wondering if you remember what that was, and do you think that would even maybe help?
I don't remember. Louise has never had a problem with sugar. I must have been talking about somebody else. And going off a drug you've been on for 3/4 of your life, you might want to do the things that are traditionally done to rev your metabolism up, like exercising every day, at the very least walking every day, you know, getting out there and getting active. But she needs to be talking to her doctor. And you know, at 25, I mean, there's other drugs. If she really believes that she needs a pharmaceutical to help her with her ADHD, there are other drugs that are far less.
Killer the killer. So, and to now, where the president's not so subtle comments have driven citizens to terrorist plots. People with influence over weak minds, they always wash their hands of any responsibility. Except there's one guy, though, that did go to jail, even though he did influence people, but he never picked up a weapon and never was at the crime scene. And that was Charles Manson. So what's the difference between Chuck, Manson, and all these people?
Well, Charles Manson specifically directed his, the women in his family, and a couple of guys too, to go out and kill Sharon Tate, etc. Bill O'Reilly, yes, he said Tiller the baby killer over 20 times, and then somebody killed George Tiller. And Glenn Beck went off on the Tides Foundation over and over and over again, and then this guy shows up with hundreds of rounds of ammunition and gets in a major shootout with the California Highway Patrol as he's on his way to the annual board meeting of the Tides Foundation to assassinate all of them. To the best of my knowledge, neither Glenn Beck nor Bill O'Reilly ever acknowledged any responsibility or even any role in any of that. I think it's tragic, and it should have been on Rupert Murdoch and Fox News management to deal with that. They didn't. Now you've got people dying across America because they believe what they're seeing on Fox News. They're getting exposed to COVID. And Fox News' average viewer age is 70. I mean, this is particularly dangerous. Ro Khanna up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland by Christopher Leonard.
This is the
Hey, we have a
Thom
new video
Hartmann
up over at
Program.
ThomHartmann.com for folks just. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna. He represents the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area, in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. His Twitter handle is Rep, as in Representative, Ro, his first name, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A, Rep Ro Khanna on Twitter. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. It's great having you with us. I'm wondering what's on your mind as you're looking out at the electoral, political, environmental, and everything else landscape here, economic.
Well, two things. One, we're still in D.C. on the stimulus. I mean, it's been a crazy week. You literally had Trump, Treasury Secretary, on the call with Pelosi and the caucus negotiating the final parts of a bill to get people relief, and Trump tweeting out with his own Treasury Secretary not knowing in the middle of that negotiation that his deal's off. I think now he's been sees that he needs a deal as much as anyone, and so we're back trying to get people relief. But, you know, there are a lot of people who don't have any ability to pay their rent, who are running out of the ability to get food, need SNAP increases. And the reality is, even if we think Biden will win, which I'm very hopeful and it's looking optimistic, he still can't do anything until January or early February, and that's a lot of months to go without any deal.
Yeah, it's going to be a real problem. Congressman, your phone is breaking up, and I think that we have perhaps a problem with our internet provider on our side, but I'm not certain because. I'm sorry, say it again.
Is this better or no?
No, it wasn't. It's not the kind of breakup that happens when your cell phone's in the wrong position. I'm guessing that maybe we should try to reconnect with you and see if we can make it better. I'm going to unlock you here and let Joyce talk to you for a moment. And in fact, I'm going to put you on hold and have Joyce talk with you, and hopefully she can reconnect. She can call you or you can call us, but we can get it because it's breaking up so badly right now that I can't understand what you're saying, which is, a real problem in talk radio. Technical stuff, right? We're what, a couple of weeks away from Mercury going retrograde? I don't know what it is. But there's something funny on the internets right now, and so let's. While we're trying to reconnect with Congressman Khanna, let me see if any of my callers can get through. Okay, Patrick in Seaside, California. Hey, Patrick, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I am basically a progressive who's voting for Biden, Harris, and Democrat all the way down the ticket, but I wanted to ask Congressman Khanna to re-examine Proposition 15 and rescind his support and consider coming out strongly against it. And I wanted to tell him why. I currently co-own with my sister a small commercial property in Carmel. It lowers the threshold all the way down to $3 million.
Patrick, my apologies, but you're breaking up very badly too. Every now and then. Well, we had this problem toward the end of last year too, and it's distressing, shall we say? But I don't know. Joyce is reconnecting with Congressman Khanna right now. We will try to see if we can make this thing work as soon as she's done talking to him. I don't know if that's going to be in a second or not, but. By the way, just correcting things from yes. Oh, Congressman Khanna is on the line here now. Let's see if we can. Oops, wrong button here. There we go. hybrid B. Congressman, can we try it again?
From a landline, is that any better?
Unfortunately, it's still pretty bad. I mean, I've got our engineer in the background. Our engineers, Dave and Chase, both trying to get in touch with our phone provider right now and our internet service provider and figure out, if where this problem is, because I'm pretty sure it's not happening in our studio. We rebooted our entire phone system over the break. But let's try it. Let's see what happens.
Support net neutrality, are you?
No, I don't think so. Although, these are the kind of things, I have noticed, and in fact, Louise and I were talking about this morning, that the progressive websites, two of the progressive websites that we use a lot, Raw Story and Daily Kos, have been loading for the last 3 days really, really slowly for both of us, using different computers at different times. And, we have Comcast here, and Comcast now has the legal ability to slow down progressive websites. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're doing that. It may just be that, these websites are getting so much traffic because so many people are freaked out by, right-wing terrorists and everything else that they're looking for good progressive information. But we really need to deal with that net neutrality issue. Back to you.
And even if they're not intentionally targeting progressive websites, they may be just maximizing their profit model and deprioritizing the websites that aren't revenue generating. And so, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? So, well, let's try to pick up some phone calls here and see if we can make this work. If we can't, then we'll just have to blow this segment up and redo it, next week, and I'll just go off on a rant of some kind. But let's see what we can do. Diane in Widmer, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you for having him on. Congressman, I'd like to know, it's been alluded to, but can they invoke the 25th Amendment, Section 4? The president is incapacitated and unable to fill his job. Thank you for answering that. I've heard it, but they haven't done anything about it.
Well, Diane, and that call came through just fine.
Diane, can you hear me? Yeah.
You're still breaking up. We're going to hit a break here in 2 minutes, and during that time, we're going to try and reconnect you, and we'll just do it over and over until we get it right, because apparently some lines are working and some aren't. We'll figure it out. But your response to Diane, sir.
So, Diane, the 25th Amendment requires 2/3 of the cabinet, the president and the vice president, to find that Trump is incapacitated, which as a practical matter is just not going to happen, and the Speaker said as much. And so our focus is in 20-some days, there's an election. Let's win the election. That's the cleanest way of restoring our democracy.
Yeah, it is. So, okay. Let's see here. Michelle in Orange, California. Got a quick one, Michelle? We have a minute to the break.
Yes, I do. In California, we're having a little Armenian discussion right now, and I'm just wondering, if we can't admit to a genocide, how are we going to protect these new people that, by the way, my relatives on their headstone state that they're from Van, Armenia. That is in Turkey, and that does not exist anymore. So what can we do? They're kind of being put in a group like the Kurds. And what can we do as citizens so that this doesn't get out of hand, so that Turkey doesn't come over and kick us citizens again?
I think we have to stand up clearly for human rights. And as you know, the Congress passed this year the resolution recognizing the Armenian Holocaust and Turkey's role in that. And Turkey has had a record with on human rights violations in Syria. It continues to do so in other parts of the world. So we need to be very clear that they can't continue to have that close an alliance that they don't recognize human rights.
Let's pick this up on the other side of the break, Congressman. We're going to fill this break with some pre-recorded content while you're going to work with Joyce. We're going to get this right.
Thom Hartmann Program.
because apparently we've got some lines working and others not. So we'll figure this out. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with Congressman Ro Khanna in just a few minutes.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B. And it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Wager promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native
test back, and during that time, that person, who it turns out was positive, they didn't know for 8 days, that person infected 3 other people in their family. Had they simply known, they could have quarantined that person. Even Mick Mulvaney, right-wing crazy, former Tea Party congressman, acolyte of the Koch brothers. Even Mick Mulvaney is saying this is unacceptable during a pandemic when his own kids couldn't get tested, or one of his kids. The other one got tested and took 7 days to get the results back. He says this is unacceptable. We've got a whole video about why this is, where the ideology that's driving. This is beyond incompetence. This is actually ideological. A new video out about this for the supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. Is working. Time will tell. Congressman Khanna is on the line with us. Congressman, you want to repeat your thoughts on the on what's going on with Armenia and also, well, Nagorno-Karabakh, is it? There's another part of the world that is in crisis here.
Well, I would just think that in Armenia, in Congress, we passed for the first time ever a Armenian genocide to recognize the genocide. But with Erdogan in Turkey, I mean, the problem is that Trump has not prioritized any of the human rights issues, and without our involvement in the conflict currently, it could spiral out of control, and you could have a whole region that's engulfed in war. And so, I think that the key is for a new administration to make sure to Erdogan that if they want our help in NATO or they want our help in terms of military cells, they can't be escalating these conflicts.
Great, thank you. Linda in Douglas, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman, sometime last year, I believe, someone had phoned you when you were taking calls on Tom's show, and they had asked why you and other Democrats, in response to being called socialist all the time, don't call them out for what their actions are many times as being fascist. And you had said that you and other Democrats don't want to stoop that low. Have you reconsidered that at all in light of what's going on and what has taken place since last year?
Well, I think we have called them out very, very clearly for the use of violence in terms of not having a peaceful election transfer, for the use of violence over peaceful protesters, for the basic sabotaging of the Postal Service, and we've said that there needs to be criminal accountability. I don't think it's about not stooping low as much as making an argument that is going to have the maximum impact with voters and with the public. And I think if we can make a very strong case by just having the facts, they don't have the facts on their side, which is why they have to resort to name calling. Ultimately, I don't think that's effective.
Chris in Kokomo, Indiana, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Tom and you and the congressman, you say that a couple of these countries are completely back to normal. Does that mean that the virus has just disappeared? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I was speaking earlier about New Zealand, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, mostly the first three, and a few other countries that are largely back to normal now. New Zealand is holding a huge rugby match this weekend with Australia. But to you, Congressman.
I mean, it shows our colossal mismanagement. I mean, I had tweeted out that there are more cases in the White House of coronavirus than New Zealand, Taiwan, and Vietnam combined. I mean, it's really shocking when you think about it. And, Pence had disingenuously claimed that the Biden plan is copying his plan. That's absolutely not true. Let's just take a concrete example. The contact tracing. The White House is unwilling to even engage in contact tracing for this super spreader event that took place at the White House. They have no plan for contact tracing around the country. We need about 300,000 people hired to do contact tracing. That's just one example of something we could be doing a lot differently that would have a dramatic result, and how other countries have solved the issue.
John in Sedona, Arizona. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman Khanna, people talk about court packing, and a little twist I was thinking of is, what about stripping? Not Tom stripping like what you wrote the book on, Tom, but we actually have fewer members, and we reduced the court size by taking away the last 2 or 3 nominees that Trump put in there. I mean, it might start a political war, but it's something that's legal in the Constitution, just like packing. What do you think about that?
I caught fragments of the question, but I think the question is about the Supreme Court and what we should do. I have a
a proposal for term limits, that we should have 18-year term limits for justices, and every president should be able to appoint two. And I think that the vice president has been very, should just say that he is for court reform, and will look at all the proposals once he's president to have court reform in a way that will make sure it's fair and transparent and consider all the stakeholders.
Do you think that maybe we should be saying we're not packing the court, we're rebalancing the court, or we're unpacking the court?
Yeah, or not packing the court. You know what I think you should say when he's asked, "Are you for court packing?" He said, "No, I'm not for court packing. What I'm for is every so often the country looks at what is needed. I mean, we've expanded courts before because of administrative caseload, and some of the caseload may be too much. But I'm going to appoint a commission to study these issues, and I'm not for packing it. I mean, I think that would
sounds like a plan.
Answer.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, 17th District, California, right after this. Our book today is The 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World by Ocean Robbins, with a foreword by Joel Furman, MD. This is from the introduction.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann
Let me call it like it
Stand Up,
is. We live in a
Struggle
toxic
Forward
food
by
culture.
Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the L.A. Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He is a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House. And and a general all-around good guy. Adam in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, good afternoon. Depressions are caused by a contraction in money supply. Thousands of years of history are behind this. Why are the Democrats not highlighting that the GOP are causing a depression by contracting the money supply on purpose? Thank you.
Well, I would add, Congressman, he suggested that depressions are caused by a contraction in the money supply, and yet the Fed has produced, $7 trillion in new money? So what does all this mean?
Well, I think that they aren't contracting the money supply. I think Powell is, if anything, saying we need low interest rate environment and we need more fiscal stimulus. I think the challenge has been that the expansion of the money supply is usually to banks and loans to corporations, and they're unwilling to expand the money supply when it means providing stimulus checks for individuals and households and helping them with rent, which would be increasing consumer demand in a low interest rate environment. And so there is a hypocrisy where our government feels it's fine to increase money supply when it is in the hands of an investor class, but not in the hands of the working or middle class.
Okay. Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Professor Thom and Congressman. Let's make history today. I want to talk about Option B in the 25th Amendment. The Amendment 25, Section 4, Paragraph 1, Option B. Now, nobody talks about Option B. Option A is the Vice President and the majority of the Cabinet, but Option B is such body as Congress may by law provide. And can you get together with Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's a constitutional lawyer, and y'all do the paperwork and get a resolution for a body? Now, the 4 past living presidents could be on that panel as a jury of peers for Donald Trump and some other people, maybe the Supreme Court justice. But Option B would start the thing. And I tell you, if you get the paperwork, I'll get some Republicans to come and join you and vote for that, because Mike Pence is really ready to declare Donald Trump unfit. So let's make history. Get together with Jamie Raskin and get the paperwork. Would you do that?
Well, I just, in honesty, am reluctant to go down that path. I think we have to have elections. I think having a commission pronounce on people's health when you have elections coming up is not the right way. I mean, Abraham Lincoln suffered from depression, and there are a lot of presidents who have had issues. So my view is that there's a democratic process. You can impeach the president, and you can certainly have an election. But I am not. I don't think it would be seen well and would further polarize the country to try to do something dramatic, especially so few days before an election.
Joe in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thank you, Congressman Khanna and Tom. My thought is, by demanding that President Obama and Joe Biden be indicted by Trump's demands that the legal enforcement go after them, isn't he justifying the fact that if Joe Biden does win election and chooses to investigate Trump further and indict him, isn't Trump kind of laying the groundwork for justifying that he is sent to prison eventually?
Joe, I think it's an excellent point that, Trump has done this in terms of criminalizing his opponent, which is a strategy from the third world. He talked about locking up Hillary Clinton. He's now talking about prosecuting Obama and Joe Biden. And, if you follow third world immature democracies, that's what happens. One time, one party comes into power, and then the previous prime minister or president is in jail. And then the other side comes into power, and they put their other party in jail. I think it's a very dangerous precedent to try to criminalize politics, and he's intent on doing it.
Tony in Long Island, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call this afternoon. My question is more hypothetical. If you recall back, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s, when individuals who contracted HIV/AIDS and knowingly had sex with another individual, they could be, in fact, prosecuted for attempted murder by transferring that disease to another individual. That being said, if we have a president who willingly knew that we had a contagion that inevitably killed over 200,000 people and counting right now, would not that same hypothesis be applicable?
The same. I'm sorry, you cut out at the time. Did you catch that? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, he's talking about there were I think 33 states back in the 80s who passed laws saying that if you transmitted HIV, this was during the AIDS, the Reagan AIDS hysteria when Reagan refused to mention it and all that kind of stuff. They were passing basically, anti-gay laws, and but a lot of these laws didn't specifically name AIDS. And so in many states now, and I believe that Maryland might be one of them, or excuse me, New Jersey is one of them, which is where Bedminster is, that if you know that you're infectious with a dangerous disease and you put yourself in a position to transmit it to other people, you've committed a felony.
Yeah, no, I think that there definitely needs to be legislation on this. I mean, I do think that when you have an infectious disease like COVID, and if you're flouting the basic norms and you transmit it to someone else in a way that was reckless or negligent, that there should be accountability under the law. And certainly if you didn't take basic precautions like wearing a mask or not disclosing something and going to a place with large gatherings. So I'm open to that kind of approach.
Roger in Indianapolis, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Vice President Pence flew into Indianapolis yesterday for the express purposes of early voting. He left mysteriously for whatever reason. There's a lot of speculation. But my question is, the local news says he is a resident of D.C., not Indiana. His last residence was the governor's mansion that's occupied. Can he vote twice? Could he vote twice, get an absentee ballot from Indiana and vote in D.C.? I'll take it off the air.
Roger, I don't think he could. I don't think he could vote twice. I doubt he intends to vote twice. And I don't know the law. I mean, the law is probably pretty flexible in terms of allowing him to maintain residence in the state he resided before he became vice president. So I don't think this is an issue worth prosecuting when we have such bigger issues, which is that the administration has failed to keep the American people safe.
Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thank you both for what you do. Congressman Khanna, Tom did a great rant about this last hour, and in his 2007 film Sicko, Michael Moore hypothesized there are two types of societies, me societies and we societies. And Michael asserted a national healthcare system is a fundamental building block for a we society. Given how we might have to achieve this faster on a state-by-state basis, what's going on in your home state regarding a Medicare for All system? You know, if California does it, I think Oregon, Washington, Colorado would be right behind. Thank you, Congressman.
Well, Jeff, I completely agree with you. In fact, in Canada, it started with Saskatchewan, the province of Saskatchewan, and then that's how they got to single payer. And I have a bill in Congress that would allow states to get a waiver from the federal government so they can use their Medicare, Medicaid money to be able to create a single-payer system. And I believe we should do it in California. The legislature has passed something. I think the governor should take it up. He campaigned on that when he ran. I agree with you that having a state-by-state approach will put pressure to get it up to a federal level.
Do you think that we have 30 seconds? What is the process in California, and do you see it moving forward?
It passed the assembly. I think it's going to require the governor to say, look, I'm ready to sign it, and they can sign it and pass it in a way that's contingent. I mean, you need a state waiver. I mean, you can't have the money go to a single payer system if you can't use the federal money you get. The budget just isn't there. But what they could do is pass something saying contingent on getting a federal waiver.
So that's so that Medicare and Medicaid money can be used?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. He represents Silicon Valley area, 17th District of California, Cupertino and environs. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. Stick around. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you can tweet Congressman Khanna at Khanna, at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California. Speaking of, you're on the air with your congressman.
Good morning, Tom. Happy E25. We just got my mail-in ballot, and I guess I'm pleased to say we have 1 million registered voters in our county, and that's a really great thing. Congressman, I was hoping that maybe we could do a little something about the fire service. That's not my question, but I mean more of a regional approach because fire seasons have just been getting worse and worse every year.
Joe, I'm sorry, you're breaking up. The what service?
The fire service. The states and counties can't handle this by
fire
themselves.
service.
I remember about 20 years ago, Elton Gallagher said we could use the military to help put out the fires down south. My question, though,
Getting help for the fire service.
Yes.
Thank you, Joe. I'm sorry, you're just breaking up so badly I can't hear you. Congressman?
You know, I couldn't hear. He's talking about the fire service is the only thing.
He was
I
talking
could
about
hear.
the fire service. Yeah, he was talking about the fire service in California dealing with the wildfires and how they're overwhelmed. And in the past, the military had been brought in apparently 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, I don't think we need to bring in the military. I certainly wouldn't want the military brought in under this president, but I think what we need is resources for the state government so that we can hire more firefighters, so that we can hire and fund our services. And that's why the Speaker is insisting that any deal needs to have state and local aid. I mean, this is the irony, for all of the Republican rhetoric that we're somehow going to defund police. They're the ones who don't want to give money to state and local governments who fund all the emergency services. I mean, we should say they're the ones who are defunding ambulance drivers and firefighters and teachers and all of the essential services.
Right, and the police as well. Patrick in Seaside, you're on California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. I am a staunch Bernie AOC progressive who's a sustaining donor for the last 3 years at $42.50 a month for Free Speech TV. I'm voting for Harris and Biden and Democrats all the way down the ticket. But this time around, I'm being forced out of survival to vote Republican on Proposition 15. I was calling to strongly urge you to re-examine Proposition 15 and possibly consider coming out against it, and I wanted to let you know why. I worked in the hospitality industry for 20-plus years, and you don't pay a lot of Social Security into that with your paychecks, and I was a renter for 30 years up until 7 years ago, and I co-own a small commercial property in Carmel with 7 units. And this proposition was originally supposed to be going after Universal and Disney and big corporations and remove Proposition 13 protections. This is a property that was purchased somewhere between 64 and 68. And my monthly income was $3,500 a month pre-COVID. It's now $2,000 a month post-COVID. I'm going to be 58 next month. There's no point in me going back to school and getting a degree out of it other than something like a vanity project. I don't know who's going to hire me. I am literally living off of the rents, I'm embarrassed to admit, of our tenants. And this proposition lowers the tax threshold all the way down to $3 million. I don't understand.
Patrick, I'm sorry. We're out of time. Congressman, 10 seconds. You want to respond, or do you want to?
Patrick, I think that they should exempt the small businesses like you from the proposition, and I'm happy to look into that.
Thank you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate States were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Your calls for the hour. And let's see here. Max in Germany. Where in Germany are you calling from, Max? You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Max? I'm not hearing Max, so let's try Tom in Urbana, Illinois. Max is on line 4, Joyce, FYI. Tom, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. I appreciate it. Congressman, I've never received my $1,200 stimulus package. I live in Illinois. I've talked to Davis, was a waste of time. Talked to Durbin, waste of time. Talked to the IRS on their website, waste of time. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get this money? Take your answer off the air. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you. I am sorry you're going through that, but I've heard the same thing in my district. I was on the oversight committee, and I asked the IRS commissioner, why is this going on? Why can't they get the checks out? It turns out our software systems are legacy systems still from the 1960s that we have in the federal government, so it's just a completely antiquated system. But I would encourage you to work with your congressman and senator. I'm happy to put you in touch with them. We have been successful in getting a number of these stimulus checks, and they just need to be persistent.
Harry in Lompoc, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman. With regards to our policies and trying to focus laser-like on resolving particular problems such as, how we deal with fighting the fires and global warming and things like that, I've noticed that the Republicans in particular seem to be teaching their followers all of the don't do's, that is to say the fallacies of basic 101 critical thinking. Do you think that there's a tactical reason for that, and what would be your answer to that?
Harry, I think that it's easier. I mean, this goes back to any philosophy of sort of control in government. It's easier to have control if people aren't questioning you or thinking independently, and that's why, in particularly today's age, we need liberal education, digital literacy at a young age, where people are taught to question things, seek out different information, different sources as key. You can't have a democracy without an educated citizenry.
Dave in New London, New Hampshire. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
This is more of a rhetorical question, but I'm not sure why people are looking to run Trump out of office with the 25th Amendment. Wouldn't we want to have him in there to run against? I mean, he's so off the rails. He's his own worst enemy. Plus, if Pence goes in there, then you'll get back some percentage of Republicans that Trump has run out of the party. Thanks. I'll take my answer off the air.
Well, Dave, I agree with you. First, I think this is a total distraction, and it's changing the conversation and making it seem that the Democrats fear having just the election on the ballot box, and I think it gives him an excuse to go and rally his base. So I don't think this is the conversation we need to be having right now. And then secondly, substantively, I think we have elections and we have an impeachment process, and the idea of using a commission or cabinet to remove a president may end up just further polarizing a nation. So I am not focused on that conversation. There are people in my party and progressives who disagree with me, so that's just my opinion.
PK in Tacoma. We have a minute and a half to the end of the hour. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Okay, thank you. I just would like to know what is happening with the next stimulus package. Thank you.
PK, we're trying very, very hard. The speaker is, we were very close. We had a conference call. Literally, I can share this with folks. I mean, we had a conference call. The speaker was saying how the deal was coming together, and literally while we were on that conference call, the president tweets out saying the deal is off. And the irony is that the people who are blocking the president is McConnell and the ideologues in the Senate, because they just don't believe in government spending when it comes to social services. They're fine with government spending for corporations and for banks, and so we're working hard. And the reason it's urgent is if and when I hope Biden wins, you're not going to get any cooperation at all from the Senate, and so you could have literally a scenario. Certainly up through the end of January, where we're getting no relief. And then if we haven't taken back the Senate, who knows when we could get relief. And that's why the Speaker is working very hard to get whatever deal we can.
Congressman, in the remaining 20 seconds or 25 seconds, your thoughts on what's coming up in the next week, where we should be focusing our attention and our activism?
I would say three things. One is the stimulus and seeing if we can get something done. Two is the election security, and that is access to ballots. I mean, right now we're in all of the state courts, litigation, seeing if ballots are going to get counted, seeing if voters are going to be suppressed. And then the final point is making sure that we have a peaceful transition of power, which first time in my lifetime I'm concerned about.
Yeah, amen. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's great talking.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll be right back with more of Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler. we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's getting even weirder at the top of the New York Times today. Trump's taxes show he engineered a sudden windfall in 2016, more than $21 million in highly unusual payments from the Las Vegas hotel he owns with Phil Ruffin. The records show how the cash flowed in the chain of transactions to Trump-controlled companies and then directly to Trump himself. I think that, the media has certainly figured this out, and Donald Trump's even, I think some of his supporters are figuring out that this guy is a professional grifter. That's what he is. He's been a grifter his whole entire life. His dad was a grifter. His kids are grifters. It's, I referred to them as the Trump crime family. The Trump grift family is not it's not so much a thing, but I think crime family works. But anyway, so that it's anything goes Friday. So I'm just going to pick up your phone calls here, and we'll see where we go with it. Winston in Ormond Beach, Florida. Hey, Winston, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Professor. I've been listening to you for a long time. Listen, these neo-Nazis, how do they get away with this in America, being a Nazi after, killing Jews and killing Americans on the beaches in France and stuff like that, and these people working with these tattoos on their neck, and the American public doesn't get excited at all about it. Don't even mention it. And I noticed when I was in high school, or in sixth grade, back in 1955, and this one woman, she was my teacher, and she was the one that started telling us a story about her brother. Her brother got killed during the Second World War on the beaches in France, and I could see her pain, and her, and what she was crying about, what she was feeling. And when you see these bodies like on the old films, and you see the bodies washing up on shore, and then now you got these Nazis running around bragging, and they got the Nazi insignias on their necks, and claiming they're Nazis. And what's wrong with America? Why don't we, look what they did to the Jews and stuff, and why don't we get excited about it? About these people. Like I've seen them in Tennessee, going through Tennessee and eastern Tennessee. You'll see signs and neo-Nazi signatures and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense to me. With all the stuff that we got going on, and yet these people are allowed to be that. And I think of all the mothers that just cried and cried losing their sons during that war. But is there anything we can do, Tom, about that to get things?
I think as the generation that fought the Nazis, the original anti-fascists. My father was one of them. He, right out of high school, he volunteered for the army to go fight Nazis, and fortunately, I suppose the war ended while he was in boot camp. So he ended up in Japan for 2 years with the occupation forces. But as did Louise's father, same deal actually. They were about the same age. And in fact, Louise's dad was in Japan for 2 years as well. But I think that generation is largely gone. My dad died in 2006. Louise's dad died, somewhat before that. And the people who remember our government used to produce, what you could call public, propaganda videos. They were public service announcements about Nazi ideology. You can find them on YouTube. They're not hard to find. Yeah. And then in the 1950s, we were producing propaganda videos about the horrors of communism, and because we were fighting the Cold War against the Stalin and then Khrushchev and all that kind of stuff. And it's been a long time since we have had the government itself say there is an external threat. And I think the largest piece of what's going on here, Winston, is that the Klan is still unacceptable in the United States in polite company, as it were.
Yeah.
We're not, polite company is the wrong phrase. The Klan has become unacceptable over the last 20, 30, 40 years, even among white racists, even in so-called conservative communities. And so they're moving in other directions. And what they found is that being a Nazi is not as unacceptable. And being a white supremacist is even more acceptable than being a Nazi. And proclaiming that your domestic terrorism organization is actually a militia is even more acceptable than calling yourself white supremacists. But they're all they're all the same thing. And we need to acknowledge this and recognize that we have a problem with domestic terrorism being incited by essentially Nazis. I mean, CNN did a graphic the other day where that showed this was murders from 2007 till last year committed by domestic terrorists, and 74% were committed by right-wing extremists, 2% by left-wing extremists, and that's for what, a 13-year period. The FBI understands this. The FBI issued a report on this back in 2009 that was written during the Bush administration, but because it attacked the Nazis, the Republicans got all upset about it because they're on the same end of the spectrum, the hard right. And they actually used public opinion, essentially, to force President Obama to pull that report and just, bury it someplace. And so now we've got Christopher Wray is coming out and talking about this, and Donald Trump is all upset, and he's trashing the director of the FBI now because the director of the FBI is saying, the biggest threat we have in the United States right now, your biggest threat of getting killed by a terrorist in America is not a Muslim, it's not a lefty, it's not a protester or even a looter in Portland or something. Although I don't think we've had any looting here, we've just had vandalism. It's right-wing militias. They literally have been killing people, and these numbers are from 2007. I would take it all the way back to the 90s with Tim McVeigh. I don't recall the exact year that happened, the Oklahoma City murder, but it started. It really picked up steam when Bill Clinton was elected in the early 90s, in 92, 3, 4, 5. And I think that a large part of that was the result of the NRA spreading absolute fear and hysteria in order to sell more guns. They have been very, very successful at making hundreds of billions of dollars in profits, or in revenue anyway, certainly billions of dollars in profits for the weapons industry, particularly now the assault weapons industry. And that propaganda that was being spread by the NRA to frighten people, to get them to buy guns, radicalized people politically and push them into things like these so-called militia groups that are just, white supremacist, neo-Nazi domestic terrorism groups. And God bless Gretchen Whitmer yesterday for saying these are not militias, these are domestic terrorists. And that's exactly what they are, because, she was targeted for that. Winston, thank you for the call. Ian in Portland. Hey, Ian, what's up?
Hey, how's it going? So I'm an undecided voter, and you touched briefly on the Federal Reserve a little while ago. I'd like to expand on that if possible and get your take on it. I see them as like the central source of wealth inequality and systemic oppression throughout the Western world, and I can't understate that enough. I see, Jared Kushner, these guys have been involved in this crony capitalist pyramid scheme for a long time, but I also see this as like a nonpartisan issue because many Democrats have also been involved in this. What are we
Ian, we're going to hit a
do
break in 10 seconds. I'm sorry, but the Fed is not what's fueling inequality. It's the tax code. I mean, this all changed in 1980. Prior to 1980, working class people and even the bottom end, even minimum wage people, were seeing their wealth increase at a slightly faster rate than the top 1%. Since 1981, when Reagan cut the taxes on very, very rich people and changed the corporate tax incentives, what's happened is all this $50 trillion has flown to the top 1%. It's tax policy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I get concerns about the Fed. I have concerns about the Fed, and we can have a conversation about that. I'm sorry, Ian, that I shouldn't have taken your call so close to the break. Call another time and we can dig into that more, but that's not what's causing inequality. And welcome back, Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to bring people's attention or remind them that one of the liabilities, one of the dangers of COVID-19 is the danger of having a major stroke. And that is something that can happen to people absent of any other symptoms. And this problem is getting so bad that the virus causes blood clots that for patients that have to be on dialysis, they're literally clogging the dialysis machines 3 or 4 times a day because of the blood clots, and they have to give them blood thinners. And I personally know someone that's relatively young. This is happening in young people, 30 to 40 years old. I know someone who was a vegetarian, did not eat a gallon of ice cream a day, was not in that risk pool, very severe stroke. So, wear your mask, be really careful because this disease is insidious. It can sneak up on you in 100 different ways, and these strokes are happening probably, as far as I can see, in about 1.5%, maybe more of the people that are getting COVID.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed about this for Alternate and Raw Story a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, about why. In fact, you Google my name and why COVID is worse than you think, and it'll pop right up. And I laid out that, and I linked to all the science on it. And I think, frankly, Jonathan, one of the stories that I don't think gets covered anywhere near enough is the unexplained deaths. Since COVID started circulating around the world, every country, including the United States, are starting to see death rates going up in ways that are not explained. And most of those deaths have to do with heart attacks or strokes. And the prevailing assumption is that these are COVID cases that were never diagnosed because the only symptom that they presented was that they dropped dead from a heart attack or they were paralyzed by a stroke. So spot on, Jonathan. I totally agree with you. And
I just want to say quickly that there are a couple blood markers they're finding. One is called D-dimer, which is a protein fragment. Another one is thrombin, which is an enzyme. So those are markers. But yeah, and I'll look at that article. I wasn't aware of that, so that's very interesting. But they're finding these clots in the lungs and in the kidneys. So it's very shocking.
And in the liver.
Thank you, though. And the liver, yes.
In basically, it's all the highly vascularized organs. Some of them are if it happens in the brain, that we call that a stroke. If it happens in the heart, we call that a heart attack. Or if it impedes the flow of blood to the heart. When it happens in the lungs, that's COVID lung. When it happens in the liver or it happens in the kidneys, you get kidney failure. This is essentially a disease of the blood vessels because they're rich in these. Angiotensin receptor sites. I believe angiotensin is the name of the hormone that regulates blood pressure. And the virus likes to go where those are the keys that they use to enter the cells of the body. And it's not a good thing. Jonathan, thank you for the call. Spot on. And it's just another reason why it's so important to stay safe, until we've got... I got an email from Donald Trump about 20, 30 minutes ago. It was during the break at the top of the hour. And the headline was, "We're developing a cure." And they're not developing a cure. They're developing treatments and vaccines. But, this is just crazy. Stay safe. We'll be right back. 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate states were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your phone calls, Gary in Minneapolis. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Tom, I'd like to ask if Trump loses the election and refuses to leave office, Joe Biden wins, and come Inauguration Day, what would happen if the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court refuses to administer the oath of office to Joe Biden? I'll take your answer
That's
off
not going
the
to
air.
happen. Yeah, Gary. I don't think that the ceremonial part of it is absolutely necessary. Although they redid it when Obama was first sworn in because John Roberts screwed it up. So they redid it. But again, I think that was more like, touch wood kind of thing. The reality is that if John Roberts said, I'm not going to do it, probably Sonia Sotomayor or Breyer or Kagan would step forward and say, I'll swear him in. I can't anticipate. I can't imagine that that's going to happen. Actually, Lori in Portland. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hi there. I wanted to not forget about the separation of the migrant kids, and I wanted to say that there could be a study on the effects just by studying mothers who lost kids to adoption. And I'm one of those mothers. And something I wanted to mention is that I belonged to adoption groups for many, many years, had an eating disorder from the minute I lost my child to the minute I reunited with him. And there's a whole lot of mothers. Adoption, like anything else in America, there's a lot of money to be made through lawyers' fees and that kind of thing. And it has its place, and it can be a good thing, but there are also a dark side to it. And what I've been reading and finding out lately is that Betsy DeVos has been a part, somehow she's got her hands in the separation of those kids, not specifically separating them, right. But the agency, Bethany Agency, is taking those kids, and they're saying that they're not adopting them out, but they're fostering them. But she has relatives involved in Bethany Services, which is the group that's taking them and supposedly
in Michigan,
just fostering them. But the thing about it is, when I belonged to these groups for years, a lot of us were search angels, reuniting people. And the one company that came up over and over and over again, when we heard Bethany Services, we were like, oh, here we go. They were the most non-cooperative. They didn't want to help reunite. They didn't want to give any information. It was completely the most difficult one that we ever dealt with. And the thought of them trying to pass this no abortion, there's a lot of young women that just because they're young and single, which isn't as bad today now as it was in my day, but they pressure them. They start calling them birth mothers instead of mothers to get them to to disconnect from being a mother, so that they'll pay for them to stay in apartments. And then if the woman changes her mind, they'll say things like, well, you'll have to pay for the apartment or the car rental. And so I just see the non-abortion, I see that Christian agency really pushing more young women. And I think that mothers could be a study for what happens, because when you talk to adopted people and mothers, the panic attacks, the psychological issues, the eating disorders, the suicide attempts.
No, I get it, Lori. You're getting redundant, but I absolutely get it, and thank you. I can't speak to that. I've read, I did read an article about it last year about Betsy DeVos being involved with one of these agencies, and that's very grim. And you make a strong argument, at the very least, for open adoptions. Chris in Fresno, California. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to call and address fracking here in California. Coming from Fresno.
Chris, I'm sorry. Your phone is breaking up really badly. I can't understand you. I'm going to put you on hold here. Mark in Long Beach, California. You want to try it, Mark?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay. 2 quick questions. Supposing the ACA is struck down, and here's the scenario. Biden wins, got a Democratic House of Representatives, and you got a Democratic-controlled Senate. Doesn't that mean that even if it's passed, it will be struck down again? And then the second question is real quick. Could you just explain briefly what is the public option and how it works? And thank you for taking those 2 questions.
Sure, Mark. The public option is every person has the ability to buy Medicare. I pay for my Medicare every month. It's a couple $100 a month. So Medicare is not free. So you could choose, I could choose a policy. If I was under 65, I could choose and the public option was in place. I could choose a policy from United Healthcare, or I could choose Medicare. And that's the public option, number one. Number two, I think that your analysis is probably spot on. In all probability, the Supreme Court will strike down Obamacare, and that will open up an opportunity for a Democratic administration with a Democratic House and Senate, hopefully, and I think we're at a break, Sean, to pass something that's a whole lot better than Obamacare, to pass like Medicare for All or something like that. So let's hope. We'll see, Mark. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I didn't mean let's hope it gets struck down. I meant let's hope that no matter what happens, that we can get something better than Obamacare. That was a good first step, but we got to go a lot further.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets, and our sewers, our bodies, and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
The Hidden History of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, etc., not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 5,000 lawyers just signed a letter, an open letter to senators asking them not to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court because they said, well, they urged them by not confirming her, they would be defending the lives and fundamental rights of all Americans. That's astonishing. 5,000 lawyers just said, please don't do this. And, you know, when we're talking about our court system, I'd say that, yeah, lawyers know what they're talking about. What an amazing time we live in. I keep saying that, but I really mean it. It's an amazing time to be alive. John in St. Mary's, Idaho. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Okay, great show, Tom. Okay, my question is,
thank you.
You believe that the current economies in the world and the U.S., that there is a possibility of a worldwide depression? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely do, John. And I think that the countries that have been engaged in neoliberal economic policy for the last 40 years, specifically the United States and the United Kingdom, and to a lesser extent, some of the countries of Europe, France, for example, that have been moving and also Italy and Greece that have been moving in a neoliberal direction, are at greatest risk because their safety net, their social safety net, is the most frayed and fragile. And it's also going to challenge for Europe. It's going to challenge the euro. Already they're bending the rules about you can't run a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, et cetera. They're going to have to figure out a way around that. But yes, I think that there's a very real possibility. And although I don't think that it's necessarily going to be worldwide, what we're seeing right now is that China has fully bounced back. The renminbi, the yuan, the Chinese currency, was up, I believe it was 4% this morning. I think I was reading on the Financial Times. It's up substantially in any case. And why? Because China's fully back to business. They have basically stamped out the virus with the exception of the extreme northwestern region where they've got a border with Russia where it's coming across, and the areas where they've got 1 million or 2 million Uyghurs in their prison camps. And there's God only knows what's going on there. But outside of those regions, it looks like China has got this thing nailed down. And the economy in New Zealand is back to normal. The economies in Taiwan and South Korea are back to normal. So I think that it's going to be, I think that we're going to have a really tough time, particularly in the United States and in the UK, because we just have handled this so poorly. The UK explicitly embraced a herd immunity strategy, at least for a few months, and then Boris Johnson got sick and came back and said, whoa, you don't want to do that. And now the Trump administration is openly embracing a herd immunity strategy, which is going to lead to a minimum of 2 million deaths. John, thank you for the call. When you just think about it, if we have the case fatality rate for COVID in the United States is a little over 4%. I think it's 4.56%. And if you think that it takes 70% of the population to achieve herd immunity, well, let's say it just takes half. What if 50% of the population is herd immunity? So 50% of 340 million people, let's see, 2 goes into 3 one time, 2 goes into 14. So that's 170 million people. So you'd have to have 170 million people get COVID in order to establish a 50% threshold for herd immunity. And most experts say 70%. So, but anyhow, so there you've got, 100 and, what was I, 100, let's say it's 100, let's just pull a number, right? 150 million people. That's close enough. 150 million people. What's 4.5% of 100 million people? Well, 4% of 100 million people is 4 million people. And 4% of 50 million people is 2 million people. So that'd be 6 million people dead if the current case fatality rate is applied to half of America getting this. Now, yes, we have improved some of the ways that we respond to this, and that over time will probably drive down our case fatality rate. But still, Trump is pursuing a strategy that has the potential to kill 6 million Americans. And I just don't see how how that works for us. Other than just plunging America into a crisis. Craig in Half Moon Bay, California. Hey, Craig, what's up?
Always a pleasure, Tom. I have a question pursuant to the Second Amendment regarding well-regulated militias, which seems to be a problem. We now have militias roaming the United States who are violent. They threaten to kidnap governors. Should these people be allowed to own firearms and purchase ammunition if we have evidence that they have joined cults or groups that propose these kinds of violent tactics, or if they attend events where they're marching with Nazi flags? Should Nazis, people who say I'm a Nazi or I support Nazis, be allowed to own firearms and purchase ammunition? I do have a resolution, a PDF I'd like to email you, and have you looked at it? Maybe comment on it at a later time.
Craig, let's just be very clear. Every state in the Union has a well-regulated militia. It's called the National Guard. These groups of armed, right-wing, white supremacist, racist terrorists are not militias. They call themselves militias. They are not militias. They never have been. They never will be. They don't fall under the definition of well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment, and in my opinion, they don't fall under any definition of a militia. And therefore, I don't think that we need to try to regulate them or try to legislate them or anything. We need to call them what they are: terrorist gangs. They are white supremacist terrorist gangs. Period. Full stop. And end of speech. Craig, thanks a lot for the call. Lauren in Seattle. Hey, Lauren, what's up?
Hi. You had the debate about the oath of office and who should give it. Calvin Coolidge, his oath of office was administered by his father, and Article 2, Section 8 of the Constitution does not specify who will administer the oath.
Thank you for that reminder, Lauren. I didn't know about Coolidge's father, but I was pretty sure that the Constitution doesn't say that has to happen that way. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is such a privilege here, hanging out with some of the smartest people on the planet every day for 3 hours. I am in awe. Robert in Forest Grove, Oregon. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. The question is, why do Republicans lack empathy? Why are they so cold-blooded and lack of conscience? I think the answer is in a wonderful article by Chauncey DeVega in Salon. It's called Republican Party is Sociopathic. Republican Party is sociopathic. And what's beautiful about
Robert, first of all, I'm sorry, finish your thought.
Well, yeah. And it's what's so beautiful about the article is that it uses the criteria from the psychiatric manual to define the antisocial personality. And these are antisocial personality is a person without a conscience, without empathy, who's cold-blooded. And that encompasses most of the National Republican Party and the State Republican Party. And that explains why they're enabling Trump, because they don't have a conscience. So
I'm agreeing with you, Robert. Chauncey DeVega is one of the smartest people I know, and one of the most brilliant writers. Chauncey is, I'm just constantly amazed when I read Chauncey's work, and he's been on this program a number of times. I hold him in very, very high regard. I would say that the directional flow of cause and effect is a little different from, I haven't read the article, but from what the headline of the article would imply. I would submit to you that the Republican Party, when they sold out to giant corporations, became essentially the vehicle, the most comfortable vehicle for people who are already sociopaths. We know that somewhere between 1% and 5% of all the people in the world are sociopaths, depending on how tightly you define sociopath. And those people are going to look for a political party. They're going to gravitate, and many of them don't even realize they're sociopaths. They just think everybody's like them. And they're going to gravitate toward a particular political party. And the Republican Party has been set up in such a way that it's basically this is the place where you go if you're a sociopath or if you're an authoritarian, which is another category, although there's often some overlap. And the Republican Party has become the home of sociopaths and Republicans because it is organized, as Chauncey points out, in a sociopathic
Thom
way.
Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Anything Goes Friday as we wrap up the week here. Back with your calls in just a moment. 45 minutes past the hour. It's the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. And Larry in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Well, it's your comment about Medicare Advantage. If people will check, there's at least one not-for-profit Medicare Advantage program that I've belonged to for 15 years, my wife has belonged to for 13 years, and it's better than any Cadillac program I've ever had. As I said, SCAN was set up by Medicare recipients who wanted a better way, so they set up a not-for-profit organization.
Right.
And
so, okay, you've got a good one, and I think that's marvelous, Larry. I'm still, do what you think is best. But I'm telling you, even nonprofits figure out a way to shovel some of this money. But the more important thing, I think, is that Medicare Advantage, when Medicare Advantage was set up in 2005 as a way of privatizing Medicare to destroy the Medicare program, the Republicans in Congress set aside massive amounts of money. Your Medicare Advantage program is being subsidized by all the rest of us in ways that are destructive to Medicare. And the more people who go on Medicare Advantage, the more Medicare itself is going to be eroded. So, I'm glad it works for you. And I get it that there are some really bad programs out there. They're the ones that are typically advertised on TV. And there are some that are nowhere near as bad. In fact, I know of one that's actually being run by a union. But I believe I know of one that's being run by a union. But I still would never recommend them. Larry, thank you for the call. Lydia in Sevierville, Tennessee. Hey, Lydia.
Yeah,
what's up?
it's Sevierville. Long-time listener, lifetime Democrat. My husband got the Corona-19. I have it. It's a horrible thing. They have shut down the Walmart in our city, part of it's Pigeon Forge. It's a Smoky Mountain area, and we've had a Kroger's to shut down. We had a person to die at Kroger's, and they're going to, at the end of the month, they're supposed to let the mandate for masks. You don't have to wear a mask, but people aren't wearing them anyway. We have a lot of tourists, and I just hope people will start wearing them and be more careful and stay home, because it's just overcrowded with people and everything. So,
Lydia, how are you and your husband doing with this?
He's really, really sick. We're both diabetics. I'm doing better than he is, but I'm taking care of him. But I'm older, and I figured I'd be the one to get really, really sick. But he's worse off than I am, and he doesn't have any insurance, and he works in one of those theaters in Pigeon Forge. So, yes, they have theaters open, believe it or not, but they do.
Oh, my. Well, Lydia, please say hi to your husband for us and let him know that we're all rooting for him. And
thank
for you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for the warning, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. I do appreciate it. This is such a difficult time for so many people who didn't do anything to deserve getting a deadly disease, except being residents of the United States of America, the most stupidly run country, developed country in the world right now, with a collection of the stupidest leaders that this nation has ever seen. It's shocking. We'll be right back. On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an awe walk, AWE, an awe walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Wow, during the break, I took a call from Lydia in Tennessee, who is an older woman who is saying that she and her husband both have COVID. He's very, very sick. He does not have health insurance. They're in, small town in Tennessee. She said that the theaters are open. Nobody's wearing masks. Everybody's getting this disease. Somebody in their local Walmart just died from it. And she was just basically asking us all, please wear masks, be careful, take this seriously. We have 7 million Americans currently infected with this disease. It's mind-boggling. And Donald Trump was on Rush Limbaugh's show a little while ago, and a woman called in and said, so what are you going to do for pre-existing conditions? And he went off on a rant about Democrats and how the Democrats are trying to take him down and this and that and the other. And then finally, Limbaugh came back and said, well, you want to tell them what you're going to do about pre-existing conditions? And he said, oh, yeah, we got a plan. It's going to be better than Obamacare. It's going to be better than anything. Don't worry. It's going to cover pre-existing conditions. Never said anything specific. No, yes, we have this piece of legislation, or yes, we have, it's incredible. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and the Republican Party and our president and vice president and the attorneys general for 20, I believe it is, maybe it's 19 or 21, but in the neighborhood of 20 Republican-controlled states are going to be arguing in 5 or 6 weeks before the Supreme Court that the entirety of Obamacare should be struck down. 20 to 30 million people should be thrown off the rolls. Prices should explode for health insurance. And the protections that we have right now against pre-existing conditions should be blown up. And even in a friendly venue like the Rush Limbaugh show, he can't deal with that. I mean, it's just, this is mind-boggling. Brian in Tacoma. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, maybe you can talk me off a ledge, but I'm kind of freaking out about Cal Cunningham and Thom Tillis. And the Senate was likely going to flip or favorite for the Democrats now, and that's all in jeopardy because Cal Cunningham and his sex scandal. So maybe, do I read that wrong? I mean, I'm very worried.
No, I think you're reading it right, Brian. At the same time that Cal Cunningham is being outed for having an affair and maybe 2 affairs, which is something that, if the statistics are still holding from years ago, about half of American married people have done. But nonetheless, that's not to excuse it. He got busted for this, and that's hurting him badly. But at the same time, it came out 3 days ago that Thom Tillis's wife, when she separated from him, filed papers saying that he was cruel. And that his cruelty was so extreme that she needed basically to take this legal process to get away from him. So there might be a pox on both their houses vote going on, but we'll see. I share your concern and your disappointment, but I guess the good news is that Cunningham hasn't dropped out of the race. That would hand it to Tillis. I'd rather have an adulterer than a fascist, basically, for lack. But it's a very sad thing. I'm with you, Brian. Michael in Las Vegas. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you this morning? Thank you for all you do. I really appreciate your show.
Thank you.
I was curious, the timeline for SCOTUS hearing the Obamacare arguments. When will they issue their decision, and what potentially is the timeline for it to be struck down? I'm asking. My mother-in-law has pre-existing conditions. She is on Nevada State Medicaid. I'm concerned for her health. She's on a number of medications, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. She is high risk. for COVID.
Right.
Right. You know, and
if
so
the
if you could help
court
me with
blows up, sure. If the court somehow basically melts down, doesn't even necessarily hear all of the oral arguments, which are happening in either late November or early December. They're happening in the weeks immediately after the election. If the court doesn't hear those, or if they've already granted cert, so presumably they will, but you never know. Then I believe it's the Fifth or the Fourth Circuit Court ruling. I think it's the Fifth Circuit Court ruling that Obamacare is totally unconstitutional will stand, and that will be the end of Obamacare. If they do hear the hearings, hear the Obamacare arguments through their completion, that will probably take us into early December. And typically the court takes a few months to make a decision, to write the decisions, and to come out with them. So we would probably see it in March, I would guess. Maybe February, unlikely January, probably March, maybe even April. And if we have a Democratic president and the Democratic Party has control of both the House and the Senate, and the filibuster has been blown up in the Senate, as I really believe the Democrats are going to do, then in that case, having the Supreme Court kill Obamacare might set the stage for something much better than Obamacare. A radical expansion of a public option. Yeah, or even Medicare for all. The question then becomes, will the court blow that up? And how do they get around that? Michael, thank you for the call. Special thanks this week to Louise Hartmann, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick White, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, and Jabbermocky, the folks who help bring this show to you in many different forms and do all kinds of different things with our program. Thank you to them. And thank you to you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing our show with your friends and telling them about it and helping us grow. So have a great weekend. Be good to yourself and people around you. Tag You're It. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.